The wind came low from the hills that morning, carrying the smell of iron, sagebrush, and fear. They had her tied to the old gallows post behind the grain mill. A young woman, maybe 20, her wrists scraped raw against the hemp rope. The town called her Etta May, though no one seemed to remember who first said her name aloud. They only knew what the preacher said last Sunday, that she'd cursed a child, that her whisper had called the fever, that the good Lord demanded a sign. The sign was her. Men stood around the post with rifles leaning against their boots. Their faces were carved from dust and habit. The women stood further back, clutching shawls against the morning chill. The child she'd cursed had lived, but that didn't matter much now. Rumor had grown faster than truth could catch it. Etta's hair was tangled and gray with dust. A few strands stuck to the sweat on her cheek. Her eyes were not wild like they hoped to see, only tired. Tired and a little curious about how far people would go to prove themselves righteous. "Please," she whispered, voice hoarse, "be gentle." The sheriff didn't answer. He wasn't cruel by nature, just too used to doing what the town wanted. He spat, nodded to the preacher, and stepped aside. Someone kicked the crate from under her feet. The rope jerked, and the sound it made was sick and private, the kind of sound the wind pretends not to hear. For a moment, the whole town held its breath. Even the horses by the hitching post stopped moving. But the beam cracked before her neck did. The wood split like old bone, and the gallows arm swung sideways. Etta hit the dirt hard, coughing, the noose still around her throat. And that's when he stepped forward, the tall man in the worn hat, with one hand trembling near his revolver. No badge, no kin in town. Just a man who'd come for supplies and stayed for silence. "Enough," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but something in it made even the preacher take a half step back. The sheriff frowned. "Ain't your affair, stranger." The man's eyes flicked to Etta. The dust on her cheek, the bruises along her collarbone, the way her breath came like she was afraid to owe the air anything. He looked back at the sheriff. "It is now." His name was Cal Harlan, a rancher from 2 valleys over. He'd buried a wife 5 winters ago and had been keeping to himself ever since. Folks said he didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened, not because of what he said, but because of how he carried the quiet. He walked over to Etta, loosened the rope from her neck, and lifted her slow like she was made of glass. She looked up at him through the dust and blood and said the same words again, softer this time, almost as if to herself. "Please, be gentle." Cal swallowed, and something in him cracked open. Not pity, not love, just the first small sound of something human trying to breathe again. After 2, long buried. Behind him, the crowd murmured. Confusion, anger, guilt. The preacher raised his hand to protest, but even he hesitated. The sheriff stared at the broken beam, the splintered rope, and the man standing between them and their certainty. For the first time that morning, nobody seemed sure what was right anymore. The town didn't stop him, not because they'd found mercy, but because shame makes cowards of crowds. Cal lifted Etta onto the back of his bay mare and took the old trail east, where the river ran thin and the hills swallowed the light before dusk. Behind them, the preacher's voice carried weakly through the wind, already trying to make sense of what had just happened. "The Lord shall judge the wicked," he said to no one in particular, but even he sounded unsure which side that meant. Etta sat sideways on the saddle, her wrists resting in her lap, skin torn raw from the rope. The wind pressed her dress to her legs. Her throat was ringed red, the mark of nearly dying, the proof of being spared, the sign of shame. Cal didn't speak for a long while. The mare's hooves beat slow into the dust, steady as a heartbeat. He wasn't rescuing her, not exactly. He just couldn't stand the look on her face when the rope failed. That quiet acceptance of cruelty. He'd seen it once before, in the eyes of his wife before the fever took her. After an hour, when the town was just a bruise on the horizon, Etta finally spoke. "You should have left me there." He didn't answer. The sound of the river came before his voice did. "Didn't sit right," he said simply. "Didn't sit right to watch a woman die for gossip." "They won't forgive you," she said. "Not for helping me." "Don't need forgiving." He glanced at her, jaw tight. "I got enough ghosts." They reached the edge of the river by nightfall, a slow, shallow stream that whispered over stone. Cal made a fire near the bend. He handed her a tin cup of water, then turned away while she drank. The light played across her face, bone pale, streaked with grime and blood, but still steady. "Why'd they do it?" he asked finally. She stared into the fire, her voice almost too quiet for the crackling to hear. "Because I said no." He looked up. "To who?" She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "The preacher's son. He came to me at night, said he wanted to marry me proper, but his father said I wasn't fit. So when the fever came, they said it was me. Said I'd cursed his house." The wind shifted. The fire bent low. Cal spat into the dirt. "That ain't a curse. That's cowardice." Etta smiled faintly, not with joy, but with the strange relief of being believed. No one's ever said it that way. He looked down at her wrists, the dark bruises under the skin. Without a word, he tore a strip from his undershirt and wrapped her hands. She flinched when his fingers brushed hers. He paused. "I said I'd be gentle," he murmured. The words fell between them like something fragile and living. When the fire burned low, Etta lay back against her saddle and stared at the stars. The desert sky stretched wide and merciless, the kind that made people remember how small they really were. She whispered a prayer, not for salvation, just for quiet. Cal didn't sleep. He sat with the rifle across his knees, watching the fire die. He wasn't sure if the townsfolk would come after them. He wasn't sure if she was safe, or if he was. But the image of her hanging there wouldn't leave his mind. The way her feet had kicked once, and the silence that followed. He rubbed his thumb against his palm, feeling an ache that wasn't from age, but from conscience. Just before dawn, Etta stirred and said softly, "They branded me too, you know." He turned. "What?" She lifted the hem of her dress just enough to show her thigh, a small burn mark, raw and red, shaped like a crooked cross. "The preacher's wife said it was to purify me." Cal's jaw clenched. He reached for a coal from the fire and pressed it into the dirt until it hissed out. "Then we'll burn it again," he said quietly. "Our way." And under the rising light, he dug a small hole by the riverbank, cut a piece of cloth from his coat, and together they buried the symbol in the earth. Ash and cloth and shame, all turning to nothing. Etta watched the soil fall over it. "It won't change what they see," she said. "No," Cal replied, "but it changes what you carry." She looked up at him then, really looked, and something in her eyes softened. The first hint of belief. Not in God, not in justice, but in surviving. By sunrise, the air had turned sharp and thin. The hills were waking, coyotes calling from the ridges, the dry grass whispering underfoot. Cal had packed the fire's ashes tight into the dirt, the same way soldiers used to bury evidence of a camp. Habit never really left a man. Etta walked behind him, still limping slightly, one hand on the horse's reins. Her dress was torn near the knee, the brand hidden beneath it. They didn't talk much. The world didn't need words at that hour. The sound of boots in dust, a snort from the horse, a crow's cry overhead. That was enough to mark the living. By mid-morning they reached the canyon pass, a long scar of rock and shadow stretching between two burnt hills. Cal knew it well. He used to drive cattle through here before the drought came. It was quiet land now, emptied of everything but memory and bones. He halted and scanned the far ridge. A faint smear of movement glinted against the horizon, sunlight on metal. "They're coming," he said. Etta's breath caught. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. Sheriff's men, likely." She swallowed hard, her throat still bruised purple. "Why not leave me? They'll let you go if—" He cut her off with a look. "Too late for that. You're with me now." The mare stamped her hooves, restless. The smell of sweat and sage filled the narrow air. Cal led them into the canyon, keeping to the shadowed side, following the dry creek bed that snaked between boulders. He didn't speak again until the sound of hooves echoed faint behind them. "They'll think we took the ridge road," he muttered. "If we keep low, we might lose them before noon." Etta nodded, though fear trembled at her edges. Her hands still shook from the rope burns. "Do you ever get used to running?" she asked quietly. Cal didn't look back. "No, you just get better at not stopping." They pressed on. The canyon narrowed, high walls of rust-colored stone, streaked with years of rain and blood. A hawk circled above, its cry trailing across the emptiness like a warning. The sound reminded Etta of the noose creaking, that same thin, brittle thread between life and the fall. When they reached a bend in the gorge, Cal stopped. "Wait here." He climbed the slope, careful not to send rocks tumbling. From the ridge, he could see the riders closing in, slow but steady, their silhouettes wavering in the heat haze. One carried a rope coiled across his saddle, the same kind they'd used on Etta. His hand tightened around his rifle. He thought of turning back to fight, 1 man against 4. But something inside him, that old soldier's instinct, whispered, "Don't waste your dying. Not yet." He slid down the rocks, his boots kicking dust. "They'll reach the mouth by noon," he said. "We'll have to cross the dry lake." Etta's brow furrowed. "There's no cover out there." "No," he agreed, "but there's wind, and wind hides tracks." They reached the lake bed as the sun climbed cruel and white. The ground was cracked and wide as a church ceiling, nothing but salt crust and dust devils. Every step crunched like breaking glass. Etta's lips split from the heat. Cal handed her the last of the canteen, then tossed it aside. Metal too bright, might catch the light and give them away. By dusk, the far mountains finally rose ahead, violet under the falling sun. Cal stopped to rest. He took off his hat and wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. The silence between them was heavy, not from anger, but from shared endurance. Etta sat in the shadow of a stone outcrop, tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick. A crude line, a loop, the sign they'd buried. She drew over it until it vanished. "Back in town," she said softly, "there was a girl who used to bring me bread. Her name was Clara. She couldn't have been more than 10. She slipped a note into one loaf. It said, 'They say you're wicked. I don't believe it. Cal looked at her, really looked. The cracked lips, the dirt on her cheek, the quiet in her eyes that wasn't defeat anymore, just clarity. She believed before anyone else, he said. She'll forget me, Etta replied. Maybe, he said, but maybe not. Kids remember the things they shouldn't. Far behind them, faint on the wind, came the echo of riders' shouts, a hollow cry swallowed by miles of dust. Cal stood, checked his rifle, and said, "We move when the stars come out." Etta nodded. Her face was drawn and pale, but there was something steady in it now, something the rope hadn't taken. When night fell, the desert wind rose, dry, fierce, and full of ghosts. They walked beneath a sky thick with stars, each one sharp enough to cut through the dark. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It carried something, a strange kind of companionship, born from the same wound. And somewhere in that long, restless wind, the buried cross by the river began to fade from memory. Not gone, not forgiven, but lighter somehow. By dawn, the horizon had turned the color of old iron, low, bruised clouds rolling in from the west. Cal could smell the rain before it came, that metallic promise of thunder, the faint taste of dust rising to meet it. The wind carried the sound of pursuit, not close, but close enough. He nudged the mare forward, eyes fixed on the dark slash of cliffs ahead. "We'll take the ravine," he said. "Storm will cover our trail." Etta looked skyward, strands of hair whipping across her face. "And drown us, maybe." "Better drowned than dragged," he muttered. They reached the ravine just as the first drops fell, wide, heavy, deliberate. The sky split with light, and the sound rolled down the canyon like a beast waking. Cal led the horse into the narrow pass, boots sinking into the wet clay. The air smelled of lightning and mud. Etta stumbled once, clutching his arm. He steadied her without a word. His palm was rough, the skin warm through the chill. Then came the voices, faint but real. The riders had followed them closer than he thought. Cal turned quickly, motioning her down behind a cluster of rocks. "Stay low," he whispered. "Don't move till I tell you." The rain grew wild, hammering the canyon walls. Through the downpour, Cal caught flashes, shapes on horseback, black against the storm. He could make out 3, maybe 4 men, huddled against the wind, scanning the ravine below. "Spread out," one shouted. "Check the creek bed." Cal cursed under his breath. The mare trembled. He unholstered his rifle, checked the chamber, and aimed toward the narrow mouth of the ravine. But he didn't shoot. Not yet. He looked at Etta. She was crouched behind the rocks, soaked through, eyes wide but steady. The rope mark on her neck glistened wet. She didn't plead this time, not even with her eyes. Just a small nod, as if saying, "I'll hold." Thunder cracked above them, drowning everything. One rider dismounted, stepping into the ravine. His boots sank in the mud. He bent low, examining tracks. The water had blurred most of them, but not all. He turned to shout an order. That's when Cal fired. The sound was swallowed by thunder, but the man fell hard, a flash of red against the gray water. The others shouted, firing blindly into the rocks. Etta flinched, ducking low. Shards of stone chipped the air beside her cheek. Cal fired twice more, careful, measured shots. One horse reared and fled. The rest turned back toward the canyon's mouth, voices fading in panic. When it was over, the rain had softened, steady, endless, washing blood into mud. Cal exhaled, lowering his rifle. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the old memory of killing, something he thought he'd buried with his uniform years ago. He looked toward the fallen man. The rain had already begun to cover him, blending flesh and mud and mercy. Cal didn't move closer. Etta came forward slowly, one hand against the cliff wall for balance. Her dress clung to her legs, heavy and dark. "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said sharply, then softer. "Yes, I did." She studied him, then the sky. "You've done this before." He didn't answer. The rain filled the silence for him. They waited there till the storm passed. When the thunder faded into the distance, Cal pulled a tarp from his saddle and laid it over the dead man's face. He said nothing, offered no prayer, only a quiet nod. Etta knelt beside him and placed a small stone atop the tarp. "For the ones who don't get prayers," she whispered. The wind shifted. Somewhere, the mare snorted, impatient to move. As they mounted again, Cal looked at her, drenched, trembling, a line of mud on her cheek, and thought how strange it was that something so breakable could keep standing. "Still want me to leave you behind?" he asked. She met his eyes, voice low. "Not anymore." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Then hold on." They rode through the last of the storm, lightning flickering behind them, the smell of gunpowder mixing with rain. And though the canyon was empty now, Etta felt something walking beside them. Not death, not fear, but the weight of every soul who'd ever been chased for simply existing. As night returned, she whispered to the wind, "Please be gentle." And for once, the world almost was. By the third night, Etta's feet bled through her shoes. The storm had spent itself, leaving the world raw and shining. They followed a trail of cottonwoods until the land rose again, the ground firmer, the air faintly sweet with mesquite. When they crested a low ridge, Cal slowed the mare. "There," he said. Below lay a scatter of fence posts, a caved-in barn, and a house the color of forgotten bones. At its side, the skeleton of a windmill turned slow in the weak breeze, one blade bent, the rest sighing like an old prayer. "My place," he added. "Ain't much left of it." Etta looked down, silent. The place felt half-haunted, half-merciful, the kind of ground where no one would come looking because no one cared to remember it. They reached the porch at dusk. The door hung crooked, but it opened. Inside was dust, 2 chairs, and the ghost of a life. The smell of cedar and rain still clung faint beneath the decay. Cal lit a lantern. The soft yellow glow touched the framed photograph on the wall, a woman with kind eyes holding a baby wrapped in a quilt. Etta's gaze lingered. "Your wife?" He nodded once. "And my boy. Fever took 'em both, winter of '79. She didn't speak. Some things didn't need the clumsy weight of sympathy. He busied himself with the fire, pulling a few logs from a dry stack. The crackle filled the silence. When he finally turned, she was standing by the window, watching lightning crawl far off over the plains. "I'll sleep in the barn," she said. "You'll sleep inside," he answered. "Storm's not done. Coyotes come close this season." Her eyes flicked toward him, not grateful, not suspicious, just wary. The way a hurt animal studies a hand it can't yet trust. "I can take the floor." He shook his head, spread a blanket across the old cot, and said nothing more. Later, when the fire had burned low, Cal sat at the table mending the mare's bridle. The faint scrape of needle and thread filled the room. Etta lay still, staring at the ceiling's warped boards. "Cal," she said quietly, Why did you really stop that day? He didn't look up. Didn't plan to, he said. Was just passing through. Then I heard the crowd. Reminded me of something. What? He hesitated. Back in the war, we took a man. Deserter. He begged same way you did. Said he wasn't guilty. Just scared. The captain hung him anyway. I held the rope. He paused, hands motionless. Never slept right since. Etta turned her face away from the lantern light. Her throat tightened. I thought no one in this country had room for guilt anymore. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Guilt's the only thing this country grows easy. Outside, the windmill moaned. Rain began again, soft at first, then steady. Etta whispered, Do you think they'll find us? Cal didn't answer right away. He finished stitching, tied the thread, and looked at her. They'll try, but the trail's gone. Storm took it clean. She nodded slowly, eyes closing, trusting the sound of the rain more than his words. When dawn came pale through the shutters, the world smelled of wet earth and charred wood. Etta woke to find Cal already outside, chopping kindling. Steam rose from his coat. He saw her in the doorway and said, Coffee's on the stove. She smiled faintly. It was the first time her face had softened without fear behind it. They ate in silence. Cornmeal mush, bitter coffee. Simple, human things. After breakfast, she walked to the edge of the yard where the windmill stood crooked. Beneath it, half buried in weeds, was a small stone marked only with a single word carved by a knife. Anna. She crouched, brushed the dirt away, and felt something rise in her chest. Not pity, but recognition. When Cal came beside her, she said, She must have been gentle. She was, he said, too gentle for this land. Etta stood, looking out toward the gray line of the horizon. Then maybe it's time someone else learns to be. He met her gaze, unsure what she meant, but the words stayed with him all day. That night, as the fire burned low again, Etta took the brand cloth from her satchel, the one they'd buried by the river. She'd kept a small corner of it. Quietly, she fed it to the flames. Cal watched. Still carrying it? Not anymore, she said, but I wanted to see it end. The cloth curled, blackened, and vanished into sparks. He poured her a drink from a chipped flask, whiskey older than the house itself. Two endings, he said. She lifted it, her voice barely above the whisper of fire. To what survives them? They drank, and the night held steady. Two souls not healed, but no longer hiding. The days that followed felt borrowed. Mornings came soft and gold, drifting through the warped shutters. The air smelled of hay and rain and the faint sweetness of the mesquite trees blooming along the ridge. Etta learned the quiet rhythm of the place, fetching water from the well, feeding the mare, patching the roof where wind had clawed the shingles loose. Her hands, though still scarred, began to steady. Sometimes Cal caught her humming while she worked, a tune with no beginning or end, something older than both of them. He didn't ask what it meant. He just listened, the way lonely men do when silence finally starts to loosen its grip. But on the fourth morning, the world remembered them. Cal had gone to check the fence line. The air was thin and brittle, the kind that cracks before a storm or before gunfire. He saw it first, a line of dust far off, moving fast and certain, not weather, riders. He rode back hard, his heart knocking like hooves in his chest. When the house came into view, Etta was by the corral, hanging a sheet to dry. The white cloth caught the light, a flag to the open world. "Inside," he barked. "Now!" She froze, eyes wide, then saw what he saw. The rising column of dust. She dropped the sheet and ran. By the time the riders reached the front gate, Cal was waiting with the rifle. 4 men, maybe 5, one of them the sheriff. His badge glinted like a curse. "Morning, Harlan," the sheriff called, calm as you please. "We've been looking for your guest." Etta stood behind the doorframe, clutching her torn dress. Cal's jaw set. She's done nothing wrong. "That ain't for you to decide," the sheriff replied. His horse snorted, restless. "Town says she brought a sickness. Says she ran from justice." "Justice!" Cal spat. "You mean a rope and a sermon." The preacher's son, the same one who'd accused her, rode forward. His face was pale beneath his hat, but his mouth twisted with arrogance. "She bewitched my father's house. My sister still won't speak. The Lord knows her guilt." Cal raised the rifle. "The Lord's got nothing to do with this." The young man's hand twitched toward his pistol, quick, eager. But the sheriff lifted his own hand to stop him. "We ain't here for blood," he said. "Just give her up. Let the law handle it proper." Cal's eyes flicked toward Etta. Trembling but standing, chin lifted, the faintest defiance burning through the fear. He thought of the rope, the crack of wood, the breath that had refused to leave her body. "No," he said, "you won't touch her." The sheriff sighed. "Don't make this harder than it's got to be." But Cal had already stepped forward, rifle steady. "Go back. You've already buried enough innocent souls." For a long, shivering moment, no one moved. Then a small sound broke the tension. A child's voice. It came from the far fence, where a wagon had stopped on the road. A little girl sitting beside her mother, watching. Her voice carried over the wind, high and clear. "Leave her be!" Everyone turned. The preacher's son paled. The voice was familiar. His sister, the one Etta had been accused of cursing. The girl stared at Etta through the dust and sun, then said again, louder this time, "She's not bad. She saved my doll from the fire." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Even the sheriff's horse shifted uneasily, as if unsure whose side it stood on. Cal lowered the rifle, eyes locked on the sheriff. "You heard her." The preacher's son sputtered, color rising to his face. "She doesn't know. She knows truth," the sheriff interrupted quietly. He looked at Etta, then at Cal. "We'll say we didn't find you." The young man stared at him in disbelief. "You can't." "I can," the sheriff said, "and I will. Now ride home." The posse turned slow, reluctant, their shapes swallowed by dust. Only the preacher's son lingered, glaring at Etta like she'd stolen something he couldn't name. Then he spat, wheeled his horse, and rode off. When the sound of hooves finally faded, Etta's knees buckled. She sank into the dirt, shaking, one hand pressed against her throat where the noose had once been. Cal knelt beside her, steadying her shoulder. "It's over," he murmured. She shook her head. "No, just quieter." He looked toward the road. The little girl was still there, waving timidly, before her mother pulled the reins. Etta lifted her hand in return. A small, trembling motion, but real. Something inside her, the last splinter of self-blame, cracked and fell away. Vatjevoelting that night, Cal sat on the porch, the stars sharp above him. The world felt fragile, balanced on the breath of the windmill's broken sigh. Etta came out carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, her hands steady for the first time. Seems the Lord still sends angels, he said, half to himself. Maybe not angels, she replied softly. Maybe just children who remember kindness. They sat in silence a while, listening to the night insects sing. Then Etta reached into her pocket and drew out a length of the old rope, the piece that had once circled her neck. She'd kept it, though neither of them had spoken of it. Now she held it out. Should have burned this, too. Cal took it gently. Not yet. He walked down to the fence line, struck a match, and let the rope catch fire. The flame climbed fast, orange against the dark. The smoke curled upward, thin and pure, until it vanished among the stars. The rope burned slow, the fibers hissing like they were whispering secrets back to the dirt. Etta stood a few paces behind, the firelight trembling across her face. It wasn't joy that filled her eyes. It was release. That small, aching space where grief and relief share the same breath. Cal watched the last of the smoke fade into the stars. His jaw worked once, then stilled. He'd buried a wife, buried a son, buried his own will to speak for anyone. But tonight, he had burned something that had no grave. Shame. Hers. His. All of it turned to dust. He walked back toward the porch, the ember snapping behind him. Etta was barefoot, toes sunk into the cool earth. The smell of smoke clung to her hair. For a long while, neither said a word. The crickets took up the silence, steady and soft. Then she spoke, voice quiet as a prayer. When I was a girl, my mama said fire's got two faces. One that takes, one that gives back. Never knew which I was lighting. Cal leaned against the post, eyes still on the dying flame. Maybe both, he said. Maybe that's the point. She looked at him then, really looked. The deep lines at the corners of his mouth, the gray streak in his beard, the way his eyes carried the weight of men who've buried more than they've said. He looked back, steady, but something softer lived there now. You ever wish, she asked, that you could just stop remembering? He nodded once. Every damn day! But forgetting ain't peace. It's just another kind of death. Her lips parted, then closed again. The truth of it settled between them like dust after a storm, quiet, inescapable. She stepped closer to the fire, reached down, and scooped a handful of warm ash. She let it sift through her fingers, black against her skin. Then, with a small, trembling motion, she rubbed it over the scar on her neck. Cal froze. What are you? Marking it, she said. But my way this time. The ashes darkened the old rope burn, turning shame into something older, something claimed. She met his eyes, and for the first time since that day at the gallows, she didn't look small. He swallowed hard, voice rough. You're a strong one. She smiled faintly. No, just tired of being weak. Later that night, rain came again, soft, steady. The kind that doesn't wash things away, only cools them down enough to stay alive. Inside the house, Cal sat by the fire, sharpening his knife more out of habit than need. Etta slept curled near the hearth, her breathing even, her face turned toward the warmth. For a moment, he thought she looked like peace itself, not the loud, triumphant kind, but the quiet one earned after too much noise. He stood, walked outside, and looked over the fields. The rain had brought out the smell of the mesquite and the sweet, damp clay. The windmill creaked once, slow and rhythmic, like an old heart still beating. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and whispered, Anna, if you're listening, I think I found what you meant by mercy. Behind him, Etta stirred in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't quite hear. Her voice was soft, like someone speaking to the ground itself. By dawn, the world was changed again, though nothing looked different. The hills glowed faint blue under the early light. Mist curled around the broken fence posts. Etta stood at the well, pouring water into a cracked basin. When she caught Cal's shadow in the door, she turned, smiling slightly. "Thought I'd clean up the place," she said. "Feels wrong letting ghosts live in dust." He nodded. "Ghosts like company, but maybe they'll move on if you make it too tidy." She laughed softly, a sound small but honest. It startled him. Hadn't heard laughter in this house for years. He realized then that the sound didn't hurt. It healed. When the sun climbed higher, Etta walked out to the field, carrying a handful of seeds she'd found in an old tin. The ground was hard, but she dug anyway, bare fingers pushing through the dirt. Cal watched her from the porch. "What you planting?" he called. "Don't rightly know," she said without looking up. "Could be beans. Could be nothing at all. Just want to see if something still grows here." He nodded, tipping his hat against the light. "That's reason enough." She smiled at that, a real smile this time. Not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that survives it. That night, the two of them sat outside again, the sky wide and merciful. The air smelled of rain and ash. The windmill turned slow, singing its broken song. Etta reached over and placed her hand on his, rough against rough, scar meeting scar. "Thank you," she said simply. He didn't answer, just turned his palm so her fingers fit against his. For a long time they sat that way, not as savior and saved, not as man and woman, just two souls who'd learned that mercy isn't soft, it's stubborn. And in the fading light, the patch of freshly turned earth by the fence caught the last of the sun, glowing faint like something remembering how to live. Summer came slow that year, like it was afraid to disturb what little peace they'd found. The rains passed, and the air grew warm and lazy. The fields beyond the windmill turned gold again, thin with grass, but alive. Etta stayed. No one in town came anymore. Not the sheriff, not the preacher's son, not even the curious. It was as if the desert itself had drawn a line around that house and said, "This far, no further." Every morning she rose before the sun and walked barefoot through the yard. The soil still held its scars, old hoof prints, burned rope, the shallow pit where the brand had been buried. But now new marks crossed them, shovel lines, seeds, the print of her feet. Cal watched from the porch most mornings, hat tilted low, coffee steaming in his hand. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The air between them carried its own language, one made of small kindnesses and long silences. One evening, the sky burned orange as the horizon. The windmill turned slow and tired, moaning its familiar tune. Etta stood by the fence, looking toward the hills, her dress rippling in the warm breeze. In her hands was a small thing, a piece of the rope that hadn't burned, found half buried near the barn weeks before. She'd cleaned it, tied it into a loop, and pressed it flat beneath a stone to dry. Now it hung around her wrist, braided with a strip of blue fabric torn from Cal's old shirt. When Cal noticed, he asked softly, "Why keep it?" She turned, eyes steady. "Because I lived," she said. "And it's the truth of it. Some things you don't bury. You just carry different." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means a man understands something words can't hold. "Looks better that way," he said. "Belongs to you now." Her mouth twitched, half a smile, half a sigh. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Take what broke us and make it mean something. Doige. That night, the wind came warm and restless. Etta couldn't sleep. She stepped outside, barefoot again, the boards cool under her feet. The stars spread wide overhead, endless and kind. She looked at the patch of earth she'd planted weeks before. And there, faint, small, but real, a sprout had broken through. Pale green, trembling in the moonlight. She crouched beside it, touching the tender stem. The soil was still damp from last night's dew. She smiled, a soft, private thing, and whispered, "You did it, little one. You found your way." Behind her, the door creaked open. Cal stood in the glow of the lantern, the light carving his face into calm and shadow. "Something out there?" he asked. She looked up at him, eyes wet but bright. "Just proof," she said, "that the earth forgives." He came beside her, knelt, and together they watched the tiny leaf sway in the warm night air. Neither spoke again. The world around them, the cicadas, the soft wind, the slow creak of the windmill, did all the talking that was needed. Seasons turned. By autumn, the field beyond the house held more than weeds. Patches of green rose through the dust, stubborn, quiet, thriving. People passing on the far road sometimes saw the little ranch and wondered who still lived there, who kept the windmill turning. They said a widow had come back, or that ghosts tended the land out of guilt. No one really knew. No one came close enough to ask. But if you rode that way at dusk, you might see a woman sitting on the porch beside a tall, silent man, her hair streaked with gray now, his beard silvered in the light. Between them, on the table, sat a small pot with a single flower growing from that first seed, yellow as dawn. The woman wore a simple band of braided rope on her wrist, faded to the color of ash and sky. The man still carried the scar across his palm from that long-ago rope burn. They didn't look like heroes. They didn't need to. They looked like people who had learned to stay when leaving was easier. And when the wind came low across the fields, the sound it made through the new grass was soft, almost like a voice, almost like a prayer. Be gentle. If you ever find yourself near the old canyon road, where the windmill still leans against the sky, you'll see that patch of green where nothing should have grown. The locals will tell you a story about a woman who was nearly hanged and a man who couldn't watch another soul die. About how they burned their shame and planted something instead. They'll say the field blooms every spring, no matter how dry the year's been. Some say it's luck. Some say it's grace. But those who've stood there at dusk, who've felt the warm wind carry the smell of ash and rain, they'll tell you it's something else entirely. It's what happens when mercy outlasts memory, and when the land itself decides to remember the gentle ones.